Hey guys, how you doing? jpsarrireviews here. Now, as comic book geeks, we are in mourning right now after the loss of the great Dennis O'Neil. When you mention the name, many people come forward and they will let you know, they will tell you that they grew up inspired by his work as a writer in so many stories throughout the 70s, throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s. For over a lengthy 50-year career, he did so much for comics. He was a pillar, a foundation. He was a master builder that have really left a legacy behind that is unmatchable. Yeah, you can talk about other great creators, but he was one of the top writers, and he will always be remembered as that. So in this video, I want to really give honor to his legacy by sharing with you top 10 stories or runs that he was part of, he was involved with, that they are iconic and they deserve to be read at least once in your lifetime, or anyone's lifetime. So in the next couple of minutes, stay tuned. Number 10, Daredevil. When people think about Daredevil, most of the time they think about Frank Miller, Mark Waid. They think about those creators as the most iconic ones. But also, Dennis O'Neil was a great writer that really cemented and left a legacy behind with Daredevil. He was actually the writer in between the two iconic Frank Miller runs. He was in between them. Not only that, he was the editor of Daredevil during that time, who actually let go of, in this case, Mackenzie, and gave the opportunity to Frank Miller to write and to draw for the character. So he was the person that was involved in the creation and the development and the, I would say, transformation of Daredevil into a powerhouse in Marvel Comics. He wrote, not only that, he started back in the 60s when he started in comics. He started actually at Marvel Comics. He wrote number 18 with Stan Lee. John Romita Sr. was the artist. Then, of course, he was working for Charlton Comics, and then he moved into DC Comics. But then he came back in the 80s, and he did issue 194 to 202, 204 to 207, 210 to 18, 220 to 223, 226. This is between 1983 to 1986. He worked with David Mazzucchelli, Klaus Johnson, Bill Sienkiewicz, Barry Windsor-Smith, Sal Buscema, so some great artists in the 80s. And again, he was the bridge between those magnificent runs. So if you read the stories, unfortunately, they haven't been collected as much. You can find actually Daredevil Loves Labor's Loss, includes some of those issues. Definitely, Dennis O'Neil knows how to write those type of down-to-earth, street-level characters, and this is one of them. So it is a recommendation. Number 9, The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, in the early 80s, he was working, of course, at Marvel. He was doing a couple of things from Strange Tales, with Doctor Strange. But he started doing the work for The Amazing Spider-Man from issue 207 to 219, 221, 223, annual 14, and 15. He worked with artists like Gene Mooney, Alan Weiss, John Romita Jr., Frank Miller, Luke McDonnell. He introduced characters like Madame Web, Hydro Man. I'm always in love with Hydro Man. I always love him as a villain. So these characters were important in the 80s and the 90s. And, a lot of people don't remember much of the story. Sometimes they kind of skip it because he was actually in between some of the greatest runs of, in this case, for Spider-Man, between Mark Wolfman and Roger Stern's runs, which are iconic. But he was in the middle, and he stood his ground. He did fantastic work. You can read this through the Masterworks Volume 20 and Volume 21. Which are available, physically and also digitally. And in my opinion, they are also must read. Number 8, Shazam, the original Captain Marvel. Now, of course, the character was created by Bill Parker and C.C. Beck for Fawcett Publications. It was published at Wiz Comics back in the 30s and 40s, and the character has always been an important aspect of comics. It was. And of course, nowadays we've seen a resurgence of it because of movies, because of comics, because DC Comics has pushed the character really far and is a beloved character. But, during the 70s, there was a problem between Captain Marvel couldn't be published. There was a lawsuit, and of course DC, or in this case Fawcett, lost the lawsuit and they couldn't use the name anymore. But DC bought the rights, and they had a partnership with Fawcett, So they brought back the character. So the person in charge to bring the character as a writer was Dennis O'Neil. So he wrote the original run from issue 1 to 7, issue 9, 14 to 15, issue 17, and issue 25. There was between 1973 and 1976. Also, he did World's Finest Comics at 256 and 264. Later on, would actually include some stories that were not published in the original run. Adventure Comics 491 to 492 that was done in 1982. You know, he was involved in Shazam. He was the guy that really brought the character forward. The original issues, they had a lot of reprints from in this case, from the old times from Fawcett. But the main stories on these big issues, because there were some of them over 100 pages, they were written by him. And he was very respectful of the character as he was remembered. The comic book was geared towards children, but he cemented a lot of those things that we still now know about Shazam and the way we remember Shazam. So, you know, the book had a mild reception among a lot of the I would say, the readers. But I think it's been recognized now after so many years as a pillar for Shazam that it started there. And of course, even Jerry Ordway, who did my favorite run for Shazam in the 90s, he said that he took a lot of inspiration from Dennis O'Neil's work. Now, you can find the original comic books through the Shazam, The World's Mightiest Mortal, Volume 1. Volume 2 only has, I think, 1 or 2 issues, so it's not as important. But if you want I would say, the main work and the original comics and how the run started, then you need to get that collection. It is a must-read. Number 7, The Shadow. When people think about The Shadow, they think about the film. Of course, you know, the film is part of the history of The Shadow. But The Shadow goes all the way back to the 1930s when it was created by Walter B. Gibson. Well, the comics that were created, because it was originally a radio show. And then Street and Smith created a pulp magazine, and that magazine was very popular in the 30s. Of course, the character died out in the Golden Age, but then it was revived, in this case, in the Bronze Age, by Dennis O'Neil through DC Comics. There was a run that was only 12 issues. You know, only 1 issue was not written by Dennis, but it was started in 1973, lasted until 1975. Also, then there was a graphic novel called The Shadow, Hitler's Astrologer, published by Marvel in 1988, that now is republished by Dynamite, of course, because The Shadow, the rights are owned, in this case, by Street and Smith. But the great thing about this run, he worked with Michael Kaluta, fantastic work. Frank Robbins, E.R. Cruz. He was very faithful through all the things that he did to the original magazines. It's a very, for what it is, it's dark and gritty, but it respects the source material, respects the radio show, respects the original pulp magazines. And it's a beloved, really, run. Unfortunately, it hasn't been reprinted because, of course, no one really has the rights on, only in Street and Smith. But thankfully, Dynamite is reprinting, has reprinted 1941, in this case, The Shadow, 1941, that's what they call it, Hitler's Astrologer. It's fantastic. You need to read that one. The original run you cannot get now. But if you can find from DC, The Private Files of the Shadow, which was published years ago in hardcover and softcover. You can find them, they're kind of like a whales to find, but if you find them, sometimes you can find them for a good price. You must read those two. Those are great stories. Number 6, Iron Man. One of the greatest runs, perhaps the greatest run for Dennis O'Neil while he was working at Marvel was, in this case, Iron Man. He did a lengthy run from 1982 all the way to 1986. And he created some characters, he introduced characters and some aspects of the characters of Iron Man that were so important. He worked with artists like Carmine Infantino, Steve Ditko, McDonald, Buckler, Buscema, Mark Bright, Paul Ryan. Fantastic artists of the time. He introduced characters like Obadiah Stane, the Ironmonger. He started, diving into a lot of the things with Tony Stark was going back to, to alcoholism, drinking heavily. Gene Rhodes, Rhodey, in this case, wore the Iron Man suit for the first time, and that was the foundation later on that what became the War Machine. Also, he created the Silver Centurion armor. So in many ways, he actually was he set the foundation that later was followed with the Armor Wars by Bob Layton. So, when you come to think about what he did during those years, they were truly inspiring. There were a lot of great stories that he wrote there, and they're the foundation of the Iron Man we know today. So if you want to read the stories, I would recommend you to go to the Epic Collections. You got the Epic Collection, The Enemy Within. You have also the Epic Collection, Duel of Iron, and you can also read Iron Man, Ironmonger. Those are the 3 softcover collections that include his lengthy work with Iron Man. Number 5, Superman. Now, when you think about the writers that have defined Superman, there's so many that come to mind. You have Jerry Siegel, Elliot Maggin, Cary Bates, Julie Schwartz, John Byrne, Alan Moore, Dan Jurgens, Grant Morrison. You think about them. But you also have to think about Dennis O'Neil. O'Neil put his part in it. He was actually one of the writers in the jump from the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, and really put a lot of work in Superman through so many different issues, not only through Superman, also through the Justice League of America. He was there, as many writers during the 70s, there were sometimes a lot of writers that were writing single issues. There was no like lengthy runs as we know now. So they were kind of pushing, they jump from one book to the other. They go from, I would say, from Action Comics to World's Finest. So that was part of it. Now, in there, he started with Justice League of America, and he was known for really introducing some of the social aspects at the end of the Silver Age that really defined the Bronze Age. So he did issue 66, 68 to 75, 77, 83, 86, 115. He worked then with Neil Adams, Infantino, Joe Kubert, Murphy Anderson. With Superman, he did issue 233 to 238, 240 to 242, 244, 247, 253 to 254, 343, 351. That's between 1971 all the way to 1980. Again, he worked Adams with Kurt Swan, Dick Giordano, who actually was a collaborator of him for many, many years. Again, Murphy Anderson. Now you think about World Finest Comics, where he did a lot of team-ups with Batman and other Justice League heroes. Issue 198 to 199, which is very famous because it's the third race between Superman and the Flash. A very iconic book. Issue 201 to 202, 204, 211, 212, 214, 244, 256, 264. Man, the number goes on. That was, again, another great run. He worked with Dick Dillon, Paul Norris, Rick Buckler, Don Newton, Dick Giordano, George Tosca, Eduardo Barreto, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. So many great artists of the time. Also, the most iconic of all, perhaps when you think always about Superman and Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, you have to think about Superman versus Muhammad Ali, that was published back in 1978, New Collector's Edition. It's an iconic book, one of the most sold out issues of all times, one of the class that goes for a lot of money. If you have one of the originals, because it also was reprinted, fantastic work. You think about so many stuff that he did. He really cemented Superman, or he introduced Superman with Superman Kryptonite Nevermore. Really took away the pretty much his weakness to Kryptonite during that storyline. But definitely he really did the foundation for Superman to become what Superman is today. A very powerful hero, a very powerful being. And that's something that nowadays a lot of people say, well, now Superman has a God figure. He's super powerful. Nothing can stop him. Well, actually, part of that was the foundation that he started. For good or bad, he did. And but you can read so many of the stories. Of course, there's nothing inclusive of everything he did with Superman, but you can read the Justice League of America, the Silver Age Volume 2. At the end of pretty much the last issues are part of what he did. You also had Justice League, in this case of America, the Bronze Age Omnibus Volume 1. Volume 2 has some story, maybe one or two, but that's it. But most of it is on Volume 1. You have World Finest Guardians of Earth. That's another great collection that includes some of his stories. Adventures of Superman by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, Volume 1 and 2 also include stories that he did. And of course, you can get the Superman versus Muhammad Ali Deluxe collection or Deluxe book. when you come to think of it, many people don't think about Dennis O'Neil with Superman, but he was a big a pillar, one of those writers that was with so many writers during the 70s that really cemented the character. So in my opinion, it is one of his greatest runs. Number 4, The Question. Now, when you think about The Question, of course, you got to go back all the way to the Charlton Comics era and the Golden Age, created by Steve Ditko. But the character died out with Charlton Comics, and we didn't see much of it for a long, long time until the 80s when he was introduced by, in this case, by O'Neil. In his famous run now between 1987 and 1992, 36 issues written by him. Artists Dennis Cowan, Vil Sienkiewicz did the covers, fantastic covers. Rick Magyar did the inks, Tatiana Woods all the colors, and also Malcolm Jones III did some of the inks. When you go back to the original character, which was a representation of objectivism, in this case, Ditko was a practitioner of it. It was really, it's all about the objective world and objective way to see the world. But in this case, O'Neil introduced Eastern philosophies in it. You have to remember that O'Neil went to college and he studied philosophy there. So he used the character to push some of those things. He introduced a lot of those abilities. So he, in this case, The Question becomes a great fighter, martial artist, because in this case, O'Neil loved martial arts. He loved characters that had those traits of martial arts, and he introduced that in so many different characters. So, it was a great story. It is mature. It's not for everyone. It's in a time where it is really heavy. In this case, The Question kills without a problem. And it's a very dark, greedy story. So it's not for everyone. It's not for kids. And that is, pretty much reminds us that in this case, the best part of O'Neil is that he understood the audience. He understood the character. So he was writing for Shazam. He was doing it for kids. He was writing for people that love Batman. He was always in the between, in the edge of it. But with The Question, it's like you took the leash and he's ready to go. He just let it go, and he was very good at it. It's definitely a continuation of what he did with The Shadow, but in a darker, grittier way. So in my opinion, it's a fantastic run, one that deserves to be read. Number 3, Azrael. When you think about the 90s, when you think about Batman in the 90s, you have to think about Azrael. A character that was introduced in the Sword of Azrael 1-4, that was the art was by Joe Quesada, and Dennis O'Neil was the creator. And then, of course, the lengthy run that follows, pretty much 100 issues plus some extras, even one that is Azrael plus The Question #1, which is a team up with The Question. I love the Azrael. When I think about the 90s, when I think about some of the best runs of Batman, of course, I have to think about Nightfall. And Nightfall would not be possible without Azrael, without Jean Paul Valley, without, in this case, the characters that he introduced there. He cemented those characters, and of course, he expanded with Azrael. He worked again with Joe Quesada, Barry Kitson, Roger Robinson, Sergio Carriello, Gene Pasco, who did pretty much all the inks. But man, when you think about what he did, in this case, Azrael, the assassin for the Order of Saint Dumas, it's really an amazing thing to think of it. And of course, most people will skip it because a lot of people don't like Azrael. They don't like that era of the 90s. But man, the character to me that was important, and it's still to this day we have seen a resurgence of Azrael, and I really like that because I always liked the character. But the fact that Dennis O'Neil was involved there, and Dennis O'Neil was in his element as always, whether he was back in the Bronze Age and the end of the Silver Age, he wrote for those those audiences, but also in the 90s he was good at it. Also he wrote for the 90s audience, and in my opinion, Azrael is a great example of that. So in my opinion, it is one of his greatest achievements. Number 2, Green Lantern. And yes, I need to include this. It is a must. Because when you think about the best stories ever written by Dennis O'Neil, the first thing that comes to mind, it's one of them, of course, is Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Those were fantastic stories, but everything started with Green Lantern. He started writing on issues 63 to 64, 68, then issue 72, then 76 to 86, which actually was renamed. This is where everything was renamed all to Green Lantern, Green Arrow. This is the collaboration with Neil Adams, but also issue 89, issue 100, issue 102 to 129. And all this between 1968 all the way to, I would say, 1972, the first part, and then later issues he did between 1976 to 1980. Lengthy run and I would say that there are not many issues here, but all the issues that he did are so important, again, because they were the bridge between the Silver Age and the Bronze Age of comics. Particularly, the one that is most loved and remembered, of course, is the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Hard Traveling Heroes, issues 76 to 89, with Neil Adams. Those are fantastic. They touch so many subjects in regards to social interests. People that, about drug addiction, a big pandemic that was really happening in the country back then, about racism, about religion, about so many different aspects. He was really pushing the agenda and really defined. When people think about the most iconic comic book stories of all time, this is included in that list. So definitely it's great. He not only worked with Neil Adams there, he also worked with Mike Grail, Dick Giordano, John Staton throughout that lengthy run. And they're fantastic, in my opinion. You need to read that. Also, the introduction of John Stewart. So he did so many great things during that run. Now, you want to read this, you can find the Green Lantern, Green Arrow Absolute, which is a recommendation. Or also can find the deluxe edition. There's so many variations, whether it's self-cover, digital, all the stuff that I'm promoting here, I'm talking here, it's available also digitally. So it's easier to find. But definitely, I would say it is a recommendation. If you love Dennis O'Neil, you need to read this. Number 1, how can I skip this? Batman. Batman. When you think about Dennis O'Neil, you have to think about Batman. And when you think about Batman, you have to think about Dennis O'Neil. They go hand in hand. Matter of fact, I would say that Batman is Dennis O'Neil. He is the Batman. Because he is the guy that really created some of the great, most iconic stories in the lengthy history of Batman. He did it, and of course, people always think about the artists. They think about a lot of runs, more modern runs. They think about, the darkness that came later in the 80s, and perhaps, like Frank Miller was involved in some of that aspect. But everything was cemented, and it was started through the stuff that he did in the 70s. People will tell you, writers, creators will tell you, they took inspiration growing up, reading the comics from, in this case, Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. They remember those things. He worked Batman 224 to 225, 227, 232, 234 to 235, 237, 239 to 245, 247 to 248, 251, 253, and I can't go on and on. All the way to 684. He did so many stories in between. Detective Comics 395, 397, 399, 401. I'm just naming a few because there's so many. Batman Legends of the Dark Knight that started in 1989 all the way to 2000. He did some great collections. He did the original, the first 5 issues, Shaman. He did also Venom, who is also, those are actually now graphic novels. 50, 59 to 61, which is Quarry, is part of Nightfall. 63, 127 to 131, which is the Arrow and the Bat. He also did Batman, Green Arrow, The Poison Tomorrow. Some people don't really care much about the graphic novel, but I like it. Batman, Birth of the Demon, which is one of my most, I would say, recommended books to read from Batman. Also, he introduced Nightwing from issue 1 to 4, although it's not, I would say, Batman, but Batman was involved in this first 4 issues. And of course, this is the separation that later was followed by Dixon in his own solo run that is fantastic. Batman Gordon of Gotham 1 to 4, which is also fantastic. He did a lot of the movie adaptations of that time. So, when you come to think about Batman, you have to think about Dennis O'Neil, that he was so involved into the character that he cemented, he introduced Ra's al Ghul, Talia al Ghul. He introduced so many great villains. He brought back the Joker to the forefront. He did so many things with Batman that are so amazing, that he was so creative in that sense. During those, he worked with almost every artist that was part of DC from the, all the way from the late 60s all the way to the 2000s. He worked with all of them. Neil Adams, Bob Kane, Rick Buckler Jr., Eric Novick, Dick Giordano, Gil Kane, Bob Brown, Don Heck, Don Newton, Steve Ditko, Jim Amparo, which who I love, Jim Starlin, Marshall Rogers, Alex Alex Saviak, Ed Hannigan, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, Russ Brown, Trevor Von Eden, Brett Blevins, Ron Warner, Eduardo Barreto, Sergio Carrello, Norm Brayfogle, Michael Netzer, Greg Glenn, and Klaus Johnson. He worked with so many artists. You know, I'm not naming them all because, you know, it's hard for me to keep all that information here. But I'm telling you, when you think about the Batman, you have to be grateful to O'Neill for all the stuff that he did for the character. Now, if you want to read the stories, if you want to go all the way back, you have to read the Neil Adam Omnibus. If you can find it. If not, you can find the volume 1 to 3. Many stories are there. Shaman also is a graphic novel. Venom. Again, Poison of Tomorrow, Birth of the Demon, Night Quest and Night Sand include stories that he did as part of the Nightfall. So it's in this case, Volume 2 and Volume 3, Gordon of Gotham. And there's so many others that I can name here. So I'm telling you, when you think about Batman, you have to think about Dennis O'Neill. Without Dennis O'Neill, Batman wouldn't be what he is today. So for that, I am always grateful. Well, guys, there you have it. Well, what can I say? Dennis O'Neill was a powerhouse. He was a mastermind. He was a creative force that, you know, would never be replaced. I don't think anyone can replace what he ever did. It is a one in a lifetime you encounter a person as talented as he was. And the fact that he was not really into comics when he started writing for comics, to me, that was an amazing thing. When Roy Thomas invited him to be part of it, and he did, and it changed his life and our lives forever. And I'm so grateful for his legacy and for his lifetime. You know, his 81 years on Earth, they were amazing. The years that he spent working for comics, they were amazing. So I'm so grateful to him and his family for the sacrifices and for the adventures that we went together along. Because of his creative mind. So my deep condolence goes to his family, but also my admiration and my respect for all those years, and Godspeed to in this case, O'Neill in his last journey. But my friends, I want to say thank you. Honor the writer, honor this great creator by really purchasing his books or by collecting them and to read them, whether it's digitally or physically, because you're going to find treasure on this art. So my friends, if you have a different list, let me know in the comments below. Share with me some good memories you have with Dennis O'Neill, of the stories that you read as a kid. I would like to hear your opinion. I would like to hear your voice. So my friends, God bless you. Take care, and I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.